Coming up after the break, what's Cameron going to do about generation rent now? Sell off more council houses and condone ever-increasing rents? Housing expert Danny Dorling explains. And could eating meat take us back to a world without effective antibiotics? All this and more in part 2 of Going Underground. Following Cameron's victory last week, property developers and estate agents must have breathed a sigh of relief. The Right to Buy scheme will now be extended to housing associations, and buy-to-let investors won't have to care about rent control for tenants. But what about the 99%? Joining me now is one of the world's leading housing experts, the Halford Mackinder Professor of Geography at the University of Oxford, Danny Dorling. Welcome back, Danny, to Going Underground. You're one of Britain's greatest experts on housing. What did you think of how housing was debated in the run-up to last Thursday?
There wasn't that much on housing in the 2 months before the election. It did come up as an issue, thankfully, but it should have been a much bigger issue because the real cost of living crisis for most people is their housing costs. It's either the rent, which they're having to pay, which has been going up much, much faster than their wages, or it's the cost of trying to buy a house. Because even though interest rates are low, the amount you have to spend is so high you have to take out an absolutely enormous mortgage, which you will have to pay back.
I want to get to mortgages in a second, but were you at least pleased that it was that central buying versus renting debate that suddenly emerged in the run-up to the election, which may influence the Tory government?
That was useful. I mean, it needs to be addressed. And if you look at the swings in England, you see those parts of England, such as London, which have a large and growing number of renters, are the parts where the Labour vote went up. In Oxford East, the Labour vote went up, where we have a very large number of people renting. So renters moved towards Labour, but at the same time, people who own their houses in more average parts of the country, in Nuneaton, if you want an example, they moved away from Labour because they began to see Labour as the party of renters more and not the party of homeowners.
And anything you expect from the Conservatives on empty properties? There were a few Tories making some noises about it.
I think they'll do something about the non-dom properties in London and the buy-to-leave. I can't believe the Tories will leave these luxury tower blocks empty in London and allow more of those to happen, of in effect people stashing their cash in space in the city where people are desperate for housing. George Osborne did bring in capital gains tax on non-doms buying property, but only from April of this year. So I can see quite a few tweaks there and a lot of shouting about how wonderful it is, but this really is just at the luxury end of the market. There isn't any more money for him to do any more additions to Help to Buy. I mean, he really has spent out on that, and there are great cuts.
And you were against it anyway, in fairness.
I was against it anyway, and I thought he was largely doing it to shore up the vote, and well, that worked. But having shored up the vote and having won an election and having won it outright, so you can redraw constituency boundaries, you can do whatever you like if you control your party. There's no need for them to spend so much money holding the housing market up quite so high as they were. But for the next few weeks it should stay high because people were expecting a hung parliament and some issues about mansion tax, and all that has gone out of the window.
And so now we're facing £30 billion worth of slashing of public services. So how will that affect councils when it comes to new building programmes? Do you think that's all out the window?
Yes, I mean, councils are reduced to doing their basic statutory duty of providing social services, of providing care for adults, but the simple, and collecting a litter. Councils' ability to do much more than that, they don't even have hardly any planning officers left to think about doing this, let alone an ability to raise the money to do it. I could be completely wrong. The Conservatives could blindside me, and suddenly turn out to be like the Conservatives were in the 1950s and produce the most incredible home building programme of homes for people with limited means.
Yeah, some people might say you can't blame the electorate because Labour in successive administrations
failed to do that as well.
Well, they built fewer affordable homes, whatever affordable homes actually means. What do you think David Cameron means when he says build more affordable homes? I
think he means building more homes at 80% of market rent, so only affordable to people who are very, very well off, but not very, very, very well off. And I think a few homes for a kind of selected token key workers who look good, the odd paramedic. But basically, unless the markets can support you, you'll have to leave London. I mean, I think there really is a core belief that the market sorts everything out amongst the Conservative elite, and they will assume that if you're needed, your wage will go up and you'll be able to afford to live in London. If nobody's willing to pay you that much, well, you can't be needed. It's time to go to Birmingham.
And for the rest of the country, though, central, you would say, is the issue of mortgages and house owning when it comes to any progressive party ever getting into power here.
People in the rest of the country in average and slightly better off areas have banked their future in their house. That is their pension, that is their savings, that is their hope, that is a little bit of money they can pass on to their children, and they've been told it'll be safe, and large numbers of them have voted for the Conservative Party in the belief that that's true. What the Conservative Party haven't told them is who's going to buy their house off them, because there isn't another generation coming behind them with enough money to actually buy these houses that they think is
albeit that part of that mortgage is then invested into the stock market, into the financial services industry, and there's a huge money go around, which is why housing is so central.
Oh yeah, there's a huge money go around. I mean, estate agents do very well out of this, but none of it's actually productive. You know, this isn't actually making anything of any value. It's not trading anything. You know, all this effort we put into housing in Britain and the finance industry isn't bringing money into the country. It's entirely internal, and in many cases it's not even improving the quality of the stock. You know, people are told, don't waste money doing up your house, it won't have that much effect on the house price. So a lot of our housing stock is slowly deteriorating, particularly the buy-to-let stock. These millions of houses that have been bought by landlords recently, landlords are not investing in keeping the property up to scratch because they can just rent it out even as it slowly falls apart.
So when it comes to something more optimistic, would it ironically be a systemic financial crash of the kind we saw in 2008 that destroys the values of homes, turns people into negative equity holders? Is that our only hope?
It's not.
What would happen?
There'll be an awful lot of victims when that happens. I mean, there will come a point when housing stops going up in price because there is not a never-ending set of new potential buyers. When that happens, there'll be a set of people left holding the baby, if you like, those who bought in the last year.
Of the order of how many millions of people, though?
It won't be millions because only a few 100,000, say, buy in the southeast every year. But if house prices fall, you know, by 10% or whatever, they could be holding negative equity of £100,000, say.
Yeah, I understand. There is a method, then, that the financial crash could involve more government, depending on what political outlook one has, interference or public sector involvement in housing.
It's well worth planning for trouble ahead. I mean, we're going to possibly have an EU referendum. This could cause all kinds of chaos on the financial markets. Anything could happen. If we do have falls in house prices of the kind that's happened all the way around the rest of Western Europe, government could do what it last did in the 1970s and allow local authorities and housing associations to buy up property sold at auction at incredibly low prices and add that to the social housing stock. That property ends up being pepper-potted all over the place. And so you, in effect, get new council estates, which don't look like council estates. We've done it before. There should at least be a realisation that our housing market is not safe because the future buyers are not there. All the university students of Britain, which is half of all young women in Britain, will have debts, for those who are successful in the labour market, debts of 50, 60, 70,000 pounds in 10 years' time, before they even try to become first-time buyers. There is no great long-term future in the housing prices we have today. We're going to start seeing families living in rooms of houses in London and another family living in another room in a house. And it's been many, many decades since we've had that. And that's the likely outcome of part of this election.
Professor Danny Dorling, thank you.
Thank you.